I had an imaginary friend once. His name was Gangles. Big tall fellow, lots of hair, green all over, looked a bit like a yeti. He never helped me work out the science to save an entire civilization on a planet though, so pretty rubbish really.
Captain, I'm picking up a transmission.
We're under attack! Red alert, ready photon torpedoes. Show me where it's coming from.
Human life signs.
Somebody want to tell me how they got here? I have no idea how or why they're here, but I highly doubt it's by accident. Sensors are detecting a massive spike of radiation.
An extinction level event.
We are responsible to every living being on that planet.
Captain! He's dying.
Hello, I'm Phil. Welcome to my channel where I talk about all the things I like in geeky pop culture. Today, we're talking about Star Trek Discovery, and I'm reviewing the latest episode, New Eden, directed by Jonathan Frakes. Yeah, Riker. He's directed another episode. He, of course, directed an episode last season and has directed much Trek in the past, as well as loads of other stuff. In fact, the episode he directed last season was one of my favourite of the series. So, you know, lot to live up to there. He, of course, also directed the absolutely brilliant Star Trek First Contact. So, generally, I have quite high expectations for him as a director. Plus, you know he knows his Trek. The first thing I would say about this episode is that it feels like the closest we've got to the kind of feel of classic Star Trek. Now, I'm certainly somebody who believes that Trek needs to evolve and constantly evolve, and you shouldn't always just try and replicate the past. But what I like about this episode is it weaves in those elements of the past and makes it feel very much like a sort of standalone episode. It could be a sort of standalone episode, like with many of the tropes of, you know, a Next Generation episode or a Voyager episode, and yet it weaves in the kind of more serialized storytelling elements and more of the modern visual aspects that we've come to know and love from TV nowadays. And I think this episode actually did a really good job of blending the two. What I mean by that, and by the way it kind of makes me feel like it was very much in the vein of a classic episode, is that the kind of overall plot, the way they may have approached it may be slightly different, but the very sort of setup of it felt very classic Trek. You had an away team going on a mission down to a planet's surface. You had the trope, a well-used Star Trek trope, of having discovered a planet where there are displaced humans that have been abducted at some point in the Earth's past, and their descendants are now populating a civilization that the crew come across. That's a well-used Star Trek trope that has been used many times before, and I'm sure they will continue using it every so often again. But that's certainly another aspect that contributes to it feeling like a classic Trek episode. You have discussions about the Prime Directive. I mean, is it really Star Trek if you're not having discussions about the Prime Directive? And you have this kind of morality play aspect where it's, you know, asking questions about the morality. What are the right choices here? Having those debates on the screen and having two characters that you respect, or most people, you know, two Starfleet characters that are having that debate. So you're not instantly on the side of one of them because one of them's the bad guy, you know, and the other one is the Starfleet guy. They're both Starfleet, they're having this discussion, they're playing it out in front of us. That's very much a, you know, Star Trek, you know, TNG through to Voyager, even Enterprise era type thing. So it was quite nice to see that, but it does blend in all of the overarching story arc elements, which aren't so much an aspect of Trek that we've come to know from the past. And you get that continuing storyline, the kind of serialized storytelling elements. So this all bleeds into the overall plot of the season, and yet it still is very much its own contained episode as well. And I really like that. Now, this episode was very upfront about what it would be dealing with. It was science versus technology. And I mentioned this in my last review, that I'd heard that this was a theme that would be going through the whole series, and that it kind of worried me a bit. They had tackled this in Deep Space Nine, and I thought they did a really good job in Deep Space Nine of, you know, doing that balancing act. And I was worried that A, they didn't really have anything new to say, and B, you know, done it before for a whole, pretty much a whole 7 seasons of a show. Why do it again? But I was also worried about how they would do it here as well. So why do it again? And also, could they do it justice? And I think this episode is a bit of a mixed bag on that front. I think there were some elements of it that were really good, and I think they did really well. Other elements of it felt a bit ham-fisted, but overall, this is just one example of them tackling it. I'm sure they're going to continue, with the angel imagery and stuff to tackle it throughout the season. We'll see how it goes. But I'm feeling slightly better about it than I was last week, so that's good. Yeah, that's kind of good. However, towards the beginning of the episode, they do rather strain the point that they're going to be talking. They signpost it so much that it gets a little bit ridiculous that this is the theme they're going to be talking about. In various different situations, they bring up, mentioning faith. Pike at one point, when Stamets is describing the mycelial network and how the spore drive works to him, and he says something along the lines of, oh, well, so we're going to be jumping across the universe on mushrooms or something like that. And then he says something along the lines of, well, I'll just have to take it on faith. And, there's little lines like that scattered in the beginning that signpost the topics that they will be discussing and coming up, dealing with later on in the episode, which felt a little like, yeah, okay, we get it. We know what you're going to be talking about. You don't need to keep on. You don't need to carry on doing this. Once is fine, signposted a little bit, but they did it quite a lot, and it got a bit tedious in the end. However, a lot of the stuff that came once they got to the planet was really good. A lot of the discussions that were going on between Burnham and Pike were really interesting, and I think they did that really well, and they sort of struck the balance really well, I think, in those discussions. Particularly liked most of the good stuff was on the planet in this episode, I'd have to say. There was one scene in the ready room when between Burnham and Pike that I thought was quite good, when they were discussing religion in general, and he quotes somebody quotes Arthur C. Clarke's, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, and then he takes that a step further and says any sufficiently advanced extraterrestrial technology or species advanced enough might be indistinguishable from God. And it was kind of this debate about if something sufficiently advanced comes along that looks like God to a less primitive civilization, who are we to say it's not? And it was an interesting discussion. I fall firmly on the science side of that personally, but it was done in a way that wasn't patronising to either side, so well done, Star Trek. I think you did a good job there. Now, the religion on the planet itself was meant to be this amalgamation of lots of Earth's religions from, 200, 300 years ago, whenever it was, that had that these people, once they'd been transported to this planet, had sort of merged all the religions together. And I think that's an interesting idea. I'm not sure how likely it would be in practice, but hey, who says Star Trek has to explore things that would likely happen? Why not explore something completely out there? And I'm not entirely sure how out there it is. I think it probably would depend on how many people there were that were transported, how devout they were to their own particular religions when they were transported. If a certain, some religions outnumbered others, and there would probably be lots of factors. But maybe if there was a small enough group of people that weren't amazingly particularly devout, and there were roughly equals numbers of each religion, then yeah, I suppose it's a possibility. Just from a purely academic point of view, it would be interesting to see which bits of the religions they did take. Did they just take the good stuff, the be kind to your neighbour type stuff, or did they take the not so good, more violent stuff as well? Who knows? Another sort of morality play debate we got going on down on the planet was the age-old trope of Star Trek, the discussion of the Prime Directive, which I think was very interesting, because the Prime Directive is a very flawed directive in my own personal view, and it's good to see it challenged every so often. But it's good to see that arguments, great arguments. Neither one of them is particularly right in any situation. So you see both arguments come from two different crew members. The captain, in this case, the captain and Burnham specifically. That was really interesting. I liked seeing that. Personally, with the Prime Directive, I think it has to be on a case-by-case basis, whether you not ignore it or not. I know it's the Prime Directive, or General Order 1, as they call it here, but I'm not a massive... I've got my doubts about it as a rule anyway, so I certainly was sort of more on Burnham's side, but Pike made some good points too, and I think that's what Star Trek is at its best, making both sides of the argument and going, oh hey, they both have some good points. Now, obviously that should not be done with every sort of debate that comes up. Some things you do have to put a very black and white, look, this is bad, this is good, because, some things are more black and white. But with this particular instance, I thought it was interesting to explore in this instance, and I liked the resolution they came up with in the end as well. It kind of gave some resolution to the one guy who felt a bit hard done by on the planet, because his family had been believing for so many years, it was almost their faith, that family's faith, that Earth survived, they would come back for them, and they have now arrived. He's been proved right, and they're denying it. And so it was nice at the end that he got that closure. Even if, and then he decided, he didn't try and go with them or anything. He was just happy getting that closure. He knew that he hadn't been crazy the whole time. He had his own sort of proof, and that was good enough for him. Where the episode falls down, though, is the more on the ship stuff. The stuff going on the planet was all really interesting. Stuff going on the ship, less so. There was a moment when they introduced the threat to the planet that it sort of ramped up the tension. It added this ticking clock element, which I really liked. However, I don't think they really capitalised on that enough, and it felt tense for the first 30 seconds to a minute, that sort of very first scene where they discover it. And after that, it was kind of... It didn't feel as pressing, possibly because of the cutting back to the planet stuff, but also the way that whole plot was coming about with the Tilly elements. I don't think it kept up the tension that it started in that one scene, so I think it possibly didn't really live up to its potential there. I quite like the donut maneuver. It looked all good in space. I mean, that was a nice idea. I think maybe if they cut out a bit of stuff in the middle, that would have been good. Particularly, let's talk about Tilly, because Tilly is someone who sometimes I like and sometimes I find really annoying. I don't mind her overall, but sometimes she can be very full on. And in this episode, you had not only her full-onness being at sort of her most full-on, because she has stages of being full-on, and sometimes it's a bit more toned down than others, and yes, she has this quirky character, but sometimes in some episodes, she doesn't feel like she's much more than that. But then you get other great episodes where you explore the sort of more emotional side of her, and her anxiety and her emotions attached to her parents and their expectations and all of those sort of things. That's good, and I like that. But in this episode, we didn't get any of that. We just got the full-on quirky anxiety, and it was a bit full-on, especially when you had the secondary sort of quirky, weird character that popped up in this episode. And yes, we're back to the imaginary friends, because at the end, it turns out that, hey, she wasn't there the whole time. So the first bit to deal with that is that I think two very quirky characters, and I suppose if it was all in Tilly's mind, it kind of makes sense that the character she created would have been quirky as well, because that's how her mind thinks. But it was just a bit full on for watching those scenes, and I ended up just being a little bit annoyed most of the time with them both. I don't think it really paid off for the actress that played that part, because I have no idea if she's a good actress or not, because it could be the way it was written, it could be the way it was directed. Very much that seems like it seems like it was written to be quirky. It was probably directed to be quirky. So, you know, I don't want to put it all on the actress, but I didn't get a massively great impression of her from this episode. And yeah, the whole imaginary friend thing was interesting. The whole, you know, she wasn't there the whole time. Was she part of the angel thing? Was that the angels appearing in her form, or was that some kind of vision sent by them, or was it, you know, she got thrown across the room, hit her head rather hard, and hallucinated? We don't know. We didn't get any firm answers on that. But that was kind of interesting. But the end result was a little bit annoying. In terms of the characters themselves, we got a little bit of more of a bridge crew, because a bridge crew member went on an away mission. So that was nice. Can't remember her name, even though we got the roll call last week. I still can't remember her name. But one of the bridge crew went on the away mission, and we didn't. Saying that, we didn't really get much from her. She was sort of just there. She had a bit more, like, you got like little hints at her personality, but not really massive amounts. So hopefully she'll get a bit more in future, just so we can find out a bit more about her. But it was nice that they at least included her and didn't just have random extra number 5 or something. It was somebody that we're going to see again, at least. Talking of character growth, Burnham, I thought, got a little bit of character growth, or we saw a little bit of her character growth in this episode. That moment where she, you know, obeys Pike's orders, which she hasn't done in the past. She didn't do last episode, so it's quite quick character growth, I suppose, out of nowhere. But she didn't obey him episode last, and obviously she had the whole mutiny charge from and started a war when she didn't obey a previous captain's orders. She seems to have learnt from that in this episode. She, as she says, she's learnt from her previous mistakes. Whether or not we stick to that, I don't know, because, like I said, she did disobey his orders last time, and that was to save his life, so, you know. But it would be nice to... I'm hoping what happens with Burnham is that we see some mellowing throughout of her very sort of harsh personality. Harsh, very Vulcan-type personality, which makes sense because, yeah, she grew up on Vulcan, was raised by Vulcans. I'd like to see her become more human-like as the series progresses, and maybe this was the first hint of that. And then there's Pike. I love Pike. I think he's brilliant, and we got this sort of more insight into this cool, calm, collected guy who likes, you know, slightly to philosophize slightly, yeah, I like seeing a bit more of him and the way he thinks in this episode. And he got injured, which, let's talk about that, because obviously we all know, I said last week that he's bound to go back to the Enterprise at some point, probably at the end of this season, because hey, he's got more to do and end up where he ends up for the original series. But then I was watching some other reviews after I recorded mine, and they were saying, people were suggesting that maybe he gets injured in this series, as if to create the injuries that put him in the wheelchair and not be able to speak, that we see in the Menagerie, is that what the episode's called, of the original series, which is absolutely a possibility. I think if it's going to happen, it's going to probably happen towards the end of the series. But the fact that they threw in this sort of injury here, maybe they're going to keep doing that, I don't know, but it does make you think, or I certainly thought, or maybe they're going to build up his injuries gradually. You know, the Doctor mentioned something about his ribs in this episode, maybe gets another injury next episode, and gradually these injuries build up on top of each other because he's reckless with his own health, reckless with his own safety in the pursuit of saving others, that he just keeps on gradually injuring himself, and then there's one big one at the end. Or maybe not, who knows, he might just go back to the Enterprise at the end of the season. Don't know, but it's certainly something that crossed my mind. So that's my opinions on New Eden. What were yours? Let me know in the comments below. Let me know if you liked it. Let me know if you didn't like it. You know, be specific. Let me know what about it you didn't like. Let me know what about it you liked. Be specific, and obviously keep it nice. Keep it pleasant. We like to have a nice discourse in the comments and not get nasty. Thank you very much for... Can't even speak now. Thank you very much for watching, and I will be back next week for another review of the very next episode. And somebody suggested I should review Short Trek, so I'll try and do that at some point as well, although I'm not sure when I'm going to get time to do that, but I will try and do that as well. Thank you for watching. Do check out some of my other videos here, some more Star Trek ones, and something YouTube thinks you might like, based on its algorithm or something. And don't forget to subscribe. Thanks very much, and I'll see you soon. Goodbye.